Welcome to the End of Life Conversations podcast. I'm Reverend Wakil David Matthews.
And I'm the Reverend Mother Ana Luisa Armendariz. In this podcast, we share people's experiences with death and dying, whether it's grief and loss, joy and celebration, all things related to the end of life.
We so enjoy all our insightful and passionate guests who generously tell their stories with compassion and wisdom. So let's get started.
Today we are joined by Dr. Kimberly Harms. Dr. Harms has been around the block in life. She has served as a commissioned officer in the United States Public Health Service, a dental school professor, grief counselor, and death doula. She is an award-winning, best-selling author and international speaker on the topics of grief, conflict, and legacy planning. Her latest book, Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For.
And we will put links in the podcast notes for all of that. Dr. Harms has also suffered many personal losses, including the deaths by suicide of her mother and son, and the death by broken heart of her husband after their son's death. Her most important role now is mother to her 2 surviving children and grandmother to 6 precious grandchildren. So great to have you with us.
Yes,
thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me on today.
So we like to begin our podcast interviews asking when you first became aware of death.
Well, the first death that I dealt with in a big way was that of my mother. I was 17, and it was a suicide. My mother was bipolar, and she was mentally ill. Of course, she had a number of issues to deal with, but she was the best mother the world has ever had. She was the best mother. We had her for 6 years. We only had her for 6 years, and then she was institutionalized. So when she died when I was 17, it was a devastating thing. And at that time, things have changed, but at that time, a death by suicide was not recognized within the churches, and no pastor would allow her a church service. And we basically went to the funeral home, and it was just dripping with shame, and so that memory of death was not only horrible for me, the fact that I lost my mother, but even more horrible, worried about where was she now? Where was she for eternity? That was very different 35 years later. So that's the bad news. 35 years later, my son Eric, who was different circumstances, he was a brilliant golden boy. I mean, just and kind, caring, compassionate kid who was recruited by Columbia University, believe it or not, for engineering. And also he was a jazz pianist, so he was in their jazz program. And he had the very best first semester you could imagine. He was elected to the student government at Columbia. Like, what the heck? Because he didn't badmouth the other people he was running against. He just said what he was going to do. Can you imagine that with the politics that you would, just be, what the heck, right? We were very proud of him for that, and got elected and was doing great things there, and was even in some plays with the Barnard students. He just was so active at Columbia. He came home his first semester on top of the world. We had never seen him happier. And he went back to school. And 2 weeks later, his girlfriend broke up with him, which is a normal part of life. You should break up with someone if you're not in love with them. I mean, that's normal. But that impulsive jazz pianist brain, it was only 19 years old, not quite fully developed, didn't manage that well. And he was gone within 45 minutes of the breakup. So just bam. And our lives were shattered into a million pieces. Now, I have to add one thing to that, though. When we had the funeral for Eric, just to show you the differences in 35 years, my mother was Catholic. Eric went to a Catholic school. We were Baptist. He was a Baptist in a Catholic school. He was not at school anymore. He was at Columbia. He was at college. He was away. He wasn't even a student there anymore. For Eric's funeral, which was held, every pastor of the church showed up because he sang for the church. They were there. Every pastor. There were thousands of people there. Every pastor was there. gave a little talk. His school that he didn't even go to anymore showed up with buses of kids. The band, the entire band showed up. He was the band director. Entire band showed up. This was a all boys Catholic like military schools. They had uniforms. When we were up there and we talked about death by suicide, I could look out at this big hundreds of boys crying and telling them, "Don't do this. Look, this. He didn't know what he was doing. This is the result. This is the result." And when when his casket was being rolled down the aisle, all of those boys, hundreds of boys, stood up in their dressed uniforms, saluting his casket, and gave the absolute most amazing gift to his mother and his father and his family they ever could. So with that example, you can kind of see at least one thing that's happened is that churches and denominations, both the Catholic Church and the Baptist Church, did a complete 180 in how they managed suicide death. So I know that's a long answer. You got me into death, and so I got to let me tell you. But that's been the most impactful death experiences, of course, of my life are those two.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. What an amazing and profound story.
Yeah.
It's so profound. I know. Well, I'm grateful that you're sharing this too. Like,
yeah.
It's a lot. What were you going to say,
Wakil? Scene of, I love this, the visual of hundreds of boys crying.
Saluting.
Yeah. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. We need more of that in the world.
He was very much loved. In his own 19 years, he made more of an impact than I ever,
Yeah. Yes. Thank you again. Beautiful story.
It is. That is an immense impact on your life. So can you share with us how these two very large stories have formed who you are and how you've lived your life?
Yes. I would, for both of these two my mother and my son were unbelievably amazing. My mother taught me that I was also born with, my mother took thalidomide, which was also involved in some of her issues. She went into the institution right after she found out that thalidomide caused people to lose fingers, and I was missing fingers. So I was kind of tied into a lot of things. There were a lot of things going on, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. Who's in common with these two people? It would be me, right? I'm the common link. All of these things that go around in your head that affect your recovery, that affect your ability to kind of get out of that pit. And I'll tell you something that happened to me that was one of the most important things ever after Eric died that helped me, and I hope will help other people going through a catastrophic loss of somebody. Is right after Eric died, I was coming out of my dental office, because then you have to go back to work. How do you do that? I mean, how do you survive again? Because we were just devastated. So I was back at work, but in the zombie phase. Anybody that's had a catastrophic loss knows that zombie phase where you kind of walk around like the Walking Dead, and you try to smile. You try to get it by, but inside you're dead. So I was walking out of my office, and my husband, Jim, was talking with his cousin. And his cousin, they were having a very deep discussion, and his cousin ran up to me, wagging his finger in my face, very angry, and said, "Don't you ever let your remaining children think for a moment that they are not enough. Don't you ever do that to them." And I was like, "What?" I'm a grieving mother. What are you sitting? I mean, I'm dead anyway. What are you trying to do? Kill me again? And then I realized what he was saying. He had lost his brother when he was about the same age, about 17, 18, I think. And he felt that when he lost his brother, he lost his parents. It was a sudden death. Not drinking, and his friends left him in the car outside the house. It was Minnesota. He froze to death. And his parents never, ever recovered. And what I mean by recovered, they just couldn't process the grief. They were down in the depths of that pit and couldn't get out. And if they couldn't get out, they couldn't recognize that the other two children needed them. At least that was his expectation. So what he was telling me is, you've got other people out there, Kim, that need you. Don't lose don't lose your life to them
Mm-hmm.
in your grief over this one son. You have 2 more daughters and you have a husband.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard thing to hear. It's not an easy thing to manage, but what it taught me was that you don't just kind of go through phases or stages. You got to fight, fight, fight to get out of the grief pit. I was down there maybe like on one nostril, maybe with gets a little bit of air, and you have to fight, fight, fight to get out of that grief pit. And that is a lesson I just hope that I learned. It took a number of years, but I was always thinking, I got my girls, I got my husband, I love them too. I fight for them. It's easier to fight for someone else than it is to fight for yourself. But you're also fighting for yourself, because getting out of that pit, it's a lot happier place to live outside of that pit where you can live in peace and joy than it is down there in that fear, deep, deep pit. So that was a big lesson that I learned from that. And one that I continue to learn when my husband died, something I always keep in mind, that I need to battle the grief and work for joy. And I have to tell you that I live mostly in joy now, which I never thought was possible when I was down at the bottom of that pit.
Wow.
That's amazing. But I also am really curious about, do you feel that there is, like, it's okay to be in the grief for a while? Like, grief is important, right? So, I mean, certainly maybe a 10-year grief cycle might be a little over the top, maybe, I don't know. But do you think there's a time when somebody would benefit from hearing that? Because I kind of feel like the United States community at large doesn't ever allow for grief, right? They're like, you're fine, get up, let's go, like chop, right?
Get back to work.
Right. So there's like this like sweet spot that we actually have to bear our hearts to, that grief, that darkness, that like just fatigue, that loss. And like there is a certain kind of like cycle through it, and not just like land there and stay there. So I'm curious, like how do you discern when that's the right time?
Well, about a year after my son died, then I lost my job because I had a nerve damage, and I went to Mayo Clinic, and they said, "You've got nerve damage in your drilling fingers. You're done. No more dentistry for you." So I had some time on my hands. I started studying. No, what the heck, right? Wasn't the worst thing that happened to me, but anyway, it was pretty bad. I was the breadwinner of the family, but anyway, so I started studying to be a grief counselor. And one of the things I picked up with that just has stuck with me forever is something called Worden's tasks of mourning. And I think I just love the way he has them as tasks. I like Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. That's certainly very popular, but tasks of mourning. And what he said is the first task is you got to accept the loss, which of course that's kind of hard. You want it to be a nightmare, right? It's a nightmare. No, it's not. This is real. But the second part is processing the grief. You have to process this. I wish so much that I could wake up in 20 years like Rip Van Winkle and I'd be fine, right? I wouldn't be fine. You have to process it. And when I say fight your way out of the pit, I really mean that's the processing part. You got to work hard to fight your way out. And it takes time. I was not out. I mean, it took me at least 5 years to kind of get my eyeballs above that pit level. And then maybe another 5 or 6 to kind of just get to the joy spot. But so it took a long time. But I like the idea of I like those stages or the task, because it gives me something to work for. In the first task, of course, acceptance, processing, hard, and then adapting to your new environment. I had a new environment, no son, 2 daughters, okay, family of 4, not a family of 5. You have to adapt to all those things. That seems like a small adaptation, but anybody that's lost a son knows just the number of your family changing psychologically does something to your head. I don't know what it is. And then the last one is finding a comforting place to put that person and that grief and the memories, all those memories, where you can live your life free from that shroud of grief, but have those memories and keep that person in a real sacred place. And I just love that. And to me, that describes very, very clearly the process, at least that I went through. And also everybody's grief journey is different. Just like people, if you're trying to get healthy, like I've had 10 pounds I wanted to lose forever, and now there's 20. I mean, I'm not really getting that stuff off. Some people can do it, and I'm not real good at it. people work through the grief process differently as well. Some people can work through it a little more quickly. Some people are more slow about it. Some people can never get out. I mean, that's I don't know if I'll ever get this 20 pounds off, but I still keep trying, and I just want to encourage people to keep trying, and also not ever to judge somebody else's grief. I think that's the thing we get into trouble with. We can't judge somebody else's grief because you don't know. You don't know how all of the things involved in getting down there.
Yeah, yeah. We often talk about on this podcast that you need to meet people where they are, and that's part of our work as death counseling and working with people. Thank you. That's so important. Well, I also we've read about some of your work, and I'd like to hear more about it. Talk about how you do the work you're doing and helping people prepare and get ready. And they sent your person who told us about you sent me a long list of the things you do. So bring some of that in. Let us know the kind of ways that you work with people.
Well, I'm a widow now. When you become a widow, one of the things is, all of a sudden, like you're alone in your home, right? And I have these grandchildren. I probably would be stalking them every minute of the day if I did have something else to do. So one of the things I really would be, they'd kick me out. But I really recommend that when you find yourself alone, which 75% of women do, and then, some men do too, the smaller number, you find a purpose. You grab onto a purpose. What can you do that can be helpful? And the purpose that I grabbed onto at this point in time was realizing, I found myself between, menopause and death, right? There's those two really good places. What do I do? Well, death, hey, we're all there. We're all there. So what can we do? And so I started researching what can we do during this time to give our lives purpose and joy. Not only, and then by giving our lives purpose and joy, you give the people around you purpose and joy. Really, it's a really good deal. And I started researching that when the first thing that happened was I happened to have a lot of amazing angels all around me. I've been blessed with wonderful friends. I just can't even tell you, and family. And 2 days after my husband died, I got a call from a dear friend who was 85 and whose husband is still alive, by the way. She's not a widow, but she said, Kim, all of my friends are becoming widows. She's 85. They're by themselves. They're suffering. I decided I needed to do a widow's ministry. And your husband just died. It was 2 days after he died. So you want to be in the group? And I said, yes, sign me up. And started that week. So here I am. What a miracle is that? That like I'm going through this, and all of a sudden I get a little call. And things like that happen with all of the deaths, I have to say. And so here I am a week later in a widows group. All of us are widows. And when you get a group of people that have been through the same things, just kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous is a really good example, you can identify, you can tell them the crazy thoughts that go through your head. When I come home alone and I think, if I died, nobody would know. I mean, these things that, that you wouldn't really want. Of course, now I've just told a whole bunch of people I thought that, but, you think about things that you really wouldn't express to most people. And so we laugh and we cry together, sometimes at the same time. And we've been meeting for 4 years, ever since my husband died, once a week. And I wrote a book. The first book I wrote was about Naomi. Her name is Naomi the Widows Club, and she does devotions. She's been doing them for 4 years. So I wrote a book, Naomi the Widows Club, and it talks about the 6 widows, and then it's a weekly devotion for a whole year. So if someone, I actually did it. I got a group together and did a whole year devotion, just using the book and the devotions in the book. So I started writing that. And then I realized, okay, now what do I need? I've always had something I had to do next. I went to, high school, college, dental school, then you work because you're working to retirement. Yay, retirement. Then, I kind of retired early. I never really quite got to that retirement part because it just happened to me. And then now what do I do? And the next thing I look up, menopause, death. Okay, I'm past menopause. What do I have next? Death. So I thought, well, I need to prepare to die well. I need to really make sure that my kids know how much I love them by making sure I don't leave any mess behind.
Yeah.
And so I started researching that. And the first part of the book is developing legacies, because the best thing we can do is leave legacies, like legacies of love, resilience. What a legacy. Resilience is a big one. I have a lot about resilience. I can send lots of things about resilience. I had my 2 granddaughters just were trying out for a play, and they didn't get the parts they wanted, and you know how that is for little kids. And so I could send them some stories about, get back there, do the best you can in the part that you have. Don't worry about it. Just show, just give 100% all the time. And those are lessons that we can give to our families now, because we have we may not be able to remember a lot and the words kind of get stuck in our head, but we have a lot of background. We can really, there's a lot of things we can help them with. So I think passing those down is the first thing while we're here. But then when the time comes that we go, we need to make it so that it's as easy as possible for them to process our death.
Right.
And they're going to grieve. But I found in my research that about 57% of families have a conflict involving death.
Yeah.
Because things aren't put together right, and they're upset because Grandpa died at home. They thought he should be in a hospital, but maybe Grandpa wanted to die at home. And if he had a nice healthcare directive, you could tell. So I really focused on just getting all the things in order, everything, including legacy letters, legacy love letters. I have templates written in the book about how to write a legacy love letter, legacy letter. I talk in the middle of the book as a little section on death and dying. Let's come to face with our death. Let's think about what we're going to die. Nobody wants to talk about that, but we are. Let's look at it right in the face, and let's come to terms with it, and let's do the best we can to make sure that after we die, our kids knew how much they were loved, and they are stronger, that next generation has a softer landing, and they're emotionally resilient because we helped them to get there. And so when I die, there's a little binder. It's like, let's open it up, bam, everything's there. So
perfect. Yeah.
That's awesome. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so great. I mean, more and more we're seeing this. The last person we interviewed said that she has been doing this for 15 years and says she notices that it's finally starting to be more common and more spoken about. And people are finally starting to put things together, whatever way they do. I think, Ana Luisa said her dad keeps some stuff in a briefcase, but at least it's something,
Yeah.
And maybe, this may be an exception because Ana Luisa is so much thinking about this and myself too. So, but you're right. It's so important and such a gift. I'm doing a class tomorrow actually on how to prepare all those little odds and ends and details and practical things that you can do so that you've given that gift to your loved ones when you're done. So is there anything else in the work that you're doing that you want to speak about? I think you hit most of it. But anything else before we move on?
One of the things, as we're talking about that, because my focus is really on the emotional component of surviving death, basically kind of preventative grief, because they're going to go through grief, and maybe I could prevent it being maybe they want to go down quite so deep in the pit, if I can help them. I'm a dentist, we do prevention well, keep them up a little bit. So that's my big focus. And I think reconciliation and apologizing when necessary is very important. Like my husband, I'll tell you just a quick story. My husband died twice. He was in hospice, and he was in. We have a walk-in tub, and I was getting his oxygen off, and all of a sudden he just went and just was gone. No pulse, no breathing. He was gone. And I tried giving him some rescue breathing. Nothing happened. Nothing worked. So about 5 minutes I was trying to do that. And I called the hospice nurse. And by the way, I love hospice people. Called the hospice nurse. And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll come right over." Called my daughter. I was on the phone with her. Your dad, he's passed away. And we were expecting maybe another 6 months. We didn't know he was so close. We were just, crying on the phone. And all of a sudden, 20 minutes at least after the last breath, he was in the tub. And he just went, like in the movies. It was like,
oh my God.
In the movies. It wasn't like, it was like, like, what the heck? What the heck? Really, this really did happen. And so I dropped him. He's alive. And I dropped him. And at the same time, the hospice nurse was at my door. So somehow she had to, get into her car, come to my place, get through all the security to get. So it had to be at least 20 minutes. I mean, you're not checking the clock I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah.
I wasn't, timing him. Anyway, so there he was. He was breathing normally.
Wow.
But he wasn't conscious. And I thought, oh no, now I put him into a coma because, I really screwed, how you go through these crazy things when people are dying because you're so sad. It's just such an emotional turmoil. So the hospice nurse got him back in the bed, and he woke up, And he was perfectly there. His brain was there. The body was shot. He couldn't move. He had to have a catheter. He couldn't move. But his brain was there, which is another miracle. So I called his whole family, said, hey, you know what? Jim might not be around very much longer. So we kind of had a little living funeral, right? We brought everybody over. We had a big party. He got all the ice cream. He was diabetic. So he was excellent. I was making sure he wasn't going to go because of that. But he was ice cream, whatever he wanted. We had this big family gathering. All the kids were on the bed. We were just, it was a beautiful, beautiful moment. But most importantly, he had a brother that had not talked to him in 20 years.
Wow.
And he came in. Not only did he come in, but he came in with videotape when they climbed Mount Whitney. Remember those old, they're not video, the old real
films?
Films that click, 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 click. He brought this little film projector, click, click, click on the wall. And we sat there and watched videos of when he was 25 years old climbing Mount Whitney, and from his his deathbed, really. And the rest of the family called in on Zoom, and he talked to everybody. And then that happened to have been the birthday of my son. Our son's 31st birthday. We were having a party for his dad. And then early the next morning, he passed away again. So that reconciliation part is so critical, because not only did Jim, you should have seen his face. I see pictures of him, that day. He just, he was dying, but he just was so happy that he had reconciled with his brother. But now his brother also was happy because he had reconciled before it was too late. And I don't think many of us get those little deathbed opportunities. Like, this is not a real opportunity.
Right.
So reconcile with people, forgive people, apologize to people. That's part of your job before you go. It's
so true.
Too.
Yeah. That's so important to make that an intention, to intentionally make sure you reach out and take care of any of those leftover problems. Yeah, thank you so much for that reminder.
So
very
beautiful.
Important.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, what are your biggest challenges when you're out in the world sharing this your book, your studies, your values? Yeah, your work. What are your challenges?
Well, COVID's been a big bugger lately. I just got that last week. That wasn't very much fun. But I think, there's the interesting thing is there are not a lot. I think most of us procrastinate. One of the things that people feel like is, they're going to get all this money. They're going to get my house. I don't need to worry about it. They can figure it all out themselves. But what they don't realize is the conflict that's involved when they're trying to figure out what you want, when you could easily solve that yourself. So I like that it's trying to get people over that hump of it is work. And it's a gift of love in that you're doing a lot of work so that they don't have to. And I think that's something I try to get people over. But procrastination and being fearful. But what I'm finding is, and I talk to a lot of people, I'm in the last quarter of my life. I know where I am. And either you're in the last quarter or you don't know, because you never know what's going to happen. But I can do the math and figure out I'm in the last quarter. So I deal with most people who kind of know they're in the last quarter. So they're like, okay, my clock is ticking. I better get going. But it's important for everybody, no matter where you are in your life, because something could happen to you and you want to leave your loved ones with that message that you love them. And I know that, for instance, when my daughters are going through their legacy binder
folders,
they're going to see like the title to my car and all these documents and passwords, and then they're going to see a love letter to them. And then they're going to see I have a love letters to every one of them. And then they're going to just be reminded after I'm dead. It's a way you show your love after your life is over. And I want to just kind of get that thought through people's heads that you can continue to do that. And of course, the most important legacy you could ever leave anyone is a legacy my mother left me with only 6 years. And that's a legacy of love, that you were loved and cared for, and that you could pass that love on to others. So if you can do that, that is the greatest legacy you could, ever give. But you don't have to win an Academy Award or any of those things. It doesn't really matter. It's that legacy of love you passed on to the next generation that strengthens them and builds them up.
Beautiful.
That's so beautiful. Yep.
Yeah. Challenges. The challenges of getting past that feeling that we can't talk about this, right? That we shouldn't talk about this. Somebody actually said, talking about it will make it happen. It's not going to work that way. It doesn't work that way.
And just to add to that, I had a dear friend whose wife was dying, and they knew she was dying, but they were expecting a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
She had a lot of property and stuff that was in her name that where things could have been taken care of in an hour, just with her signature, up just so easy. But the family wouldn't even approach it because they felt that if they asked her to take care of that, they would be admitting that she was dying, and they would be betraying her. And I thought, oh no. So
Yeah.
why not get this all done before you're dying so you don't have any of that stuff, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Just beforehand. But
Well, and that's a big piece. And I think people think about property and trusts and wills. But just this weekend, I had a friend come by and I said, we need to work on our advanced care directives because I actually should update mine because I've got some new names that I need to add to this and shift it. But he's like, yeah, I've got it done. I've already decided that this is a trust. I was like, no, your advanced care directive plan. What's going to happen in case of a medical emergency, right? And he couldn't actually talk about that. Like he's like, well, it's just pull the plug. I was like, but does your family know? Right? Like we also have to scaffold this language around, yes, the estate and the trust and the wills and your body and the funeral and like the conversation. So we have work to do, right? But yeah, like people, it's okay. Like it's a beautiful journey when you start talking about these things.
Yeah. And great gift. Thank you. That's really true. Appreciate that. What helps you feel supported in this work? Do you have practices or prayers or things that you do to help you stay centered and help you stay out of the pit, if you will, or to, things that you've used as things get hard. Things get hard in this work, and ways that you've found that help you be supported and stay centered and stay in that place of joy.
I've been so fortunate. I've got just my church friends, my widow friends. I got lots of different groups now. But they've all been very supportive of me, all been helping me and encouraging me. But one group in particular stands out, and that those are the Rwandans. After Eric died, we were able to. I just somehow God put Rwanda into my head, and I ended up in Rwanda through Books for Africa. I have a dear friend, Pam Pappas, who was on the board of Books for Africa. So we ended up doing memorial libraries for Eric in Rwanda. And Rwanda is one of the most amazing countries ever because they went through this horrific genocide in 1994. So it's 30 years later. I went back about 16 years later when the prisoners were still in prison. And if you can imagine your neighbors coming over and horribly killing and mutilating your family and burning down your houses, that's what was happening. It wasn't an invading army. It was like their neighbors. Horrible, horrible, horrible thing. How do you get over that? How do you recover from that? And I was drawn to that because I thought I didn't know how I was going to recover from Eric's death. I didn't know how I was going to recover at all. And I went there, and they were the world's best grief counselors by far, because what they did is they decided as a country that if they didn't take care of the problem now, their children would just relive it. It was never going to go away. So they decided to seek justice. So the perpetrators, many of them escaped to other countries, but the ones that were left were put in jail for 20 years. But then, and when I was there, and 16 years later, the prisoners were walking down the street, 20 prisoners long with a guard on either side. And the prisoners had hoes and machetes and all that kind of stuff in their hand because they were farming their own food, right? That's what they did. And I looked outside and I said, oh my gosh, Father Remy was my guide. My gosh, Father Remy, this is dangerous. Look, they have all the tools of the genocide, and there's just 2 guards and there's like 30 prisoners. How can they do that? This is very dangerous. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, well, they're not going to do that. Where would they go? They'd just go back to their houses. Their families would send them right back to jail because they have to serve out their sentence. And I thought, what the heck? And then after the sentence, they come back into the village. A little village council sits around and decides how they're going to make amends to the families they hurt.
Wow.
They're drawn back, sometimes building a house for the person. They also many times become friends with the people whose families they killed. What how does that it just boggles your mind.
Yeah.
Those are the people, when I saw those women in Rwanda who had lost their families, who could had this wonderful smile at me, have joy again. And when I told them I was there because I lost my son and that what these libraries were memorial libraries, they just came at me and embraced me with the love I've never felt in my life. And their country is
Wow.
at peace. It's one of the safest countries in Africa. It's just as safe, according to our State Department, as Canada. So I tell people, if you're afraid to go to Canada, you shouldn't be afraid to go to Rwanda.
Yeah.
It's more dangerous to go to places in Europe. So it's if you ever want to just do an amazing study, look at what's happened in Rwanda, how they built their country up from really absolute devastation. So
Right.
Wow.
that story gave me so much strength.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, if they can do it, I mean, I can have joy too.
Wow. Beautiful. Wow. What a unique way of finding joy. Yeah. To
Yeah.
see it in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you said how many libraries now did you say were?
We have 65 libraries. They're all over the country. We have 4 legal libraries, which are great. They were Books for Africa is a great organization, and they have a special law and democracy initiative that Kofi Annan and Walter Mondale put together. And we have 4 of those there, and we have medical libraries and little baby nursery libraries, and they're all over. And I go back to visit. My favorite are the village libraries, which are now like kind of little cultural centers. People come and spend time there, and I just and just as things are, how God has things happen, they just used English as a main educational language in 2009. So up until that, it was French, and I probably don't have as many French books. So the program that I was able to help put in, along with Pam, was very, very valuable because they were in so desperate need of English books.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
It's 2011 when we went there.
Nice.
Wow.
Oh, what a great, speaking of legacies, that's a
Yeah.
great legacy.
It's a legacy
Yeah.
for Eric, and he was a book lover. He would
Mhm.
find books in libraries and save them. If they were trying to get rid of classic books, he would go save them. So
That's good.
That's beautiful.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So, what frightens you about the end of your life?
I'm a Christian, so I'm thinking I'm not really frightened because I really believe I'm going to be reunited with them. I got the people up there now.
Yeah.
I'd like to see again. I think the thing I regret about, I hope I live as long as I can, is that I've got these 6 grandchildren, and there's people in your lives that only you can affect. I'm a maternal grandmother. They got one maternal grandmother, and that's me. They've got great paternal grandparents too, though. So I have to say that's a good thing. But there's a special bond, and so I'm going to really miss them, and I just want to help them as much as I can. But I have no fear whatsoever about my own
Beautiful.
death, especially now that I'm ready. Now, I didn't have it before. I'm ready that my kids are going to have to go through all this stuff, and now it's like, hey, you guys are good. I got it all. You're all ready to go.
That's awesome. I love it.
That's a great way to avoid that fear, that
Yeah.
particular fear. Yeah. You get it done, get the
Yeah.
work done. Yeah. We've heard several people say that the biggest fear is how their children are going, or husbands or whatever, people
Whoever's
left behind
left. Yeah.
are going to have to deal with. And so, and the idea of not leaving a mess, like
Yeah.
you said,
Yeah.
don't leave a mess, and, getting things done. So thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
One thing I'd just like to add is that there are companies that a lot of people don't realize that there are companies out there that are all set up to come and take all your stuff away. And so I put money in I put an amount of money. Says, okay, this is you guys go take what you want, and these companies are going to come and take it away. That way, nobody has to be stuck cleaning out, the old car walls or whatever. So I think that's a brand new market that I think is fabulous.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We've used those. Those are great.
Yeah.
They're great. Yeah. When we moved from our big house to a smaller condo, and we downsized when our kids moved out, we realized it was funny because we had a bigger truck that came and took all our junk than the truck that we moved.
That's awesome.
It's like,
Yeah.
kind of scary. But yeah, that's a great idea. I love the idea of putting that in your will, or putting it in your advanced care
Prepping
directive.
for that.
Here's some money to call these guys up, have them come deal with that for you.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. That's a beautiful idea.
Yeah, I was thinking about this a lot too in the last few weeks because our cat passed away recently, and my kids, an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old, had a very long conversation about how to dispose of our cat's body. And my son had very, very, very firm feelings about one thing, and my daughter had it the other way. And I've always said, you can do whatever you want with my body. I'm going back home too. Like, it doesn't matter. But now I realize that is important for me to decide so that they don't argue about it, right? Right? Because I don't want that to be an issue. And, my son comes over all the time and he's like, when you die, I just really want all your clothes and I want all your toys. And, my daughter's like, well, I want some of the toys too. So I was like, I need to actually make a list of all these really cool vintage toys that they love and decide, because that would be the worst thing in the world for them to like bicker over an old toy. Right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my task right now.
And you told the story too of a couple that rented a place up in the woods when they knew that they were at the end of life, and it started inviting all their friends over and said, tell us what you'd like. Here's
Take
some.
it.
I like the idea of bringing people into our home, start bringing our friends and our family in our home and say, take it now.
Yeah. Well, that was that New York Times article about a couple who opened up their home after their kids had gone through and picked out their items. They had all of their friends, every single, come and take whatever you want. It's yours. Like, I thought that was such a beautiful gift.
It's a beautiful idea.
Yeah.
I love that.
Is there anything, Dr. Kim, that we have missed that you wish we'd have asked you?
No, I think that the main focus is just do your best to show your love after your life. And I have the book is available. I'm also doing a course called Love After Life, and just that people need a little more selective. They get all done at once. This fall sequence, and then it's done at the end. So I'm doing that too. But otherwise, no. I think that's my main focus, is just remember that, show how much you love your kids after you die.
It's beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for that. We will put all those notes in the podcast notes so people can find a way to connect to you. And we really appreciate you and the work you're doing, and
thank you,
your willingness to show up.
Yeah.
And to come and talk to us too.
And Wakil, should we have her read her scripture?
Yeah. Do you want to read that scripture that you sent us, as we like to end with beautiful quote or poetry?
I have to just tell a quick story that when it was in my office after my son died, and I had a meltdown, and I was melting down, wondering, where is my son? Where is my son? Where is my son? And the dentist down the street from us, his name was Lyndon Dungy. He's Tony Dungy's brother, if you know who Tony Dungy is. Tony Dungy's brother. And he was sending letters in the mail. But for some reason, this day, he wrote this letter, came by my office, dropped it off. And as I was crying in the stairwell with two other dental staff members around me, crying with me, just trying to, and anyone who's lost a son, you go through these crazy times where you just can't get yourself together. And I was crying. And I was wondering where he was, because it was a suicide, and you kind of wonder again. The church just got together, but you always still wonder, where is he now? Where is he now? And as I was crying, my office manager ran in, gave me this letter from Lyndon Dungy, who had delivered it himself right at that moment, and he highlighted a verse. I opened it up from Romans 8:38-39. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And that was a moment, that was another lightning moment that I just felt I was being told, my son's in heaven with God, and which is, of course, your mother, that is the most important thing. So,
yeah. Nothing can separate us from that love.
Right.
It's so great. Wow, thank you so much. Beautiful, beautiful conversation, and we're very glad to have had you with us.
Thanks so much for joining us on the End of Life Conversations. We appreciate you and look forward to sharing our stories. We encourage you to subscribe to have access to premium episodes and extra resources. Links to our guests and their recommendations and a transcript of this episode will be in the podcast notes.
Yes, thank you so much, and please tell all your friends. Follow us on social media, and again, consider subscribing for some excellent premium content. We want to acknowledge that the music we are using was composed and produced by Charles Heastand. We also want to acknowledge that we live on unceded lands that have been cared for thousands of years by Indigenous peoples who are still here.